Welcome to the second episode of Terrifying Tuesdays. Number 5. This story begins around 1980s to my grandfather. In the 80s in Santa Cruz, California, there was a lot of murdering, and there were certain ones committed on the hill called Mount Madonna. Hitchhiking was an extremely popular method of transportation, so people offering rides would be the norm. Anyways, there was a certain murder that was so violent that happened to a 19-year-old girl. She was never identified because of how bad she was killed and thrown down the mountain. Here's where the scary part comes in. My grandpa in the 80s was driving up the mountain to get back home. Keep in mind, this was around 12 a.m. because he was working long-hour shifts. He's driving down the road and sees a lone girl walking. He pulls over and asks her if she needs a lift up the mountain. She says no thanks, but I'm okay. He offers again, being a nice man. She sits there looking at the ground the entire time and then nods and gets in. My grandpa asks her why she's alone traveling this late with all the murdering occurring in the area. She explains that she ran away and she's trying to find work, all the while maintaining to look away from my grandpa. He said she smelled terrible and looked like she'd been through hell and back. Her sweater had been ripped up, covered in dirt. He asked her if she was alright and she looked at him. My grandpa at this point is telling me this story, looked pale, and I could tell that he was being serious. She didn't have eyeballs, she just had empty sockets. Her nose was terribly broken. Her face was swollen to the point where it looked like a blueberry. Her throat was slashed and hacked at. Blood dried where her neck skin should have been. My grandpa jumped out and ran a few feet back. He closed his eyes and prayed. He slowly walked back to the car and she was gone. There was still an imprint of her bottom on the seat. Flash forward 10 years and my dad is a cop working in the area. It's a late night and it's known to rain quite a lot in Santa Cruz. It was a normal night for my dad as he was cruising around at about 2 a.m. He had heard about the woman from my grandpa and it was happening to more and more people. As my dad scaled the mountain, he thought nothing of it until he saw her. At first he thought, "Oh crap, it's her." Then he laughed at himself, thinking, what am I talking about? There's no such thing. Oh boy, he was wrong. He pulled over asking if she was alright. She turned to him instantly and he saw the exact same thing my grandpa had described to him so many times. No eyes, bloody, and also disfigured. My dad stepped on the pedal and didn't stop until he was a mile ahead. He looked in his rearview mirror and she was in the back seat. Keeping in mind that it was raining, my dad nearly swerved off the road and onto the long mountainside below. He got out and he said she just vanished, poof, like magic. He instantly called my grandpa and my grandpa just said, "I told you so." Although we've moved away, I'm still afraid to go onto the mountain till this day. Number 4. This happened in October of 1994. My friends and I were in college at the time, and we were all majoring in filmmaking. We went to shoot a documentary about a local urban legend in Maryland. Allegedly, a witch had lived there long ago, and her spirit still haunts the woods. The witch was connected to several children's deaths and was hung by the locals in the 18th century. It was allegedly responsible for many disappearances since the late 1800s. Long story short, we made it to the woods and camped there for a few days. The first few nights we would hear strange noises like crackling noises coming from the woods and the sound of children. We tried passing it off as our imagination, but by the 6th day we were really freaking out. We were lost and we realized we were going in circles. We found little stick figures of people, by which I mean sticks shaped to look like people, and rock cairns around our campsite. Needless to say, we've never gone back there since that night. It doesn't matter if anyone believes this or not, but it really happened. Number 3. In the year of 1987, my parents moved into a brand new house. It had been part of a new development of houses. There were only 2 other families living on the same street at the time. My parents then spent the first day moving things into the house. At this point in time, they didn't have children. Being exhausted after the move, they decided to go to sleep. The only problem was that their bedroom furniture had not arrived. They decided to sleep on the floor in an empty room in the house. Later that night at around 12 a.m., they heard a knocking at the door and tapping on the windows. My dad thought that it was maybe a neighbor, but my mom cautioned them to worry because of the time. My dad decided to look through the peephole, and he saw an elderly couple smiling and laughing hysterically outside the main entrance. He informed my mother, and they both were really freaked out. They couldn't call anyone as the phone lines had not been put in. My dad didn't call out to the couple, but spent the night wide awake. The next morning, my dad approached a neighbor to ask them if they too had been visited by the old couple. The neighbor said there was no elderly couple, and the houses had been built on a graveyard site. Number 2. One night I was home alone as my mother had gone to her friend's house and had a couple drinks and was not comfortable with coming home at that time. I fell asleep after watching TV on the couch. I woke up and my dog began barking at nothing, probably around midnight if I remember correctly. I told him to be quiet when my backyard lights went off. The two ways it turns on is either by a switch inside or if motion is detected outside. My dog stopped barking, then I heard a faint noise, almost like weird beeping, so I decided to look out the window. I saw a figure standing there. It didn't see me at first, so I quickly ran to grab my phone to snatch a picture or two. A few seconds later, I just went in my room, and then my dog started barking again. I ran out and the figure had moved closer to the patio. I looked down to open the camera app, and then looked up, closer. It was like the weeping angels from Doctor Who. If you don't look at them, they get closer. I was about to take a picture, and as I snapped it, the figure was gone. I went outside to see if anything was left, like tracks or anything. Nothing but an odd odor, like burnt rubber with a mix of the smell after it rains or something. It was just weird. My friend texted me later that night saying he saw the same figure later that day. It even made the news from what I've heard. It still haunts me till this day. Number 1. The first thing you should know is that my mother and I have always had odd dreams that end up coming true. We don't get them often, but we know we're having them when someone is talking to us directly in a dream. The first time I had one of these dreams, I was 9 years old. It was around February 2005, and all over the news was a story of a girl that had gone missing named Jessica Lonsford. I hadn't seen anything about it since I was a young kid and didn't watch the news. However, I woke up crying one night because I dreamt about a girl who had just been abused. She was in a closet in a trailer, crying. I opened the door and she looked up at me and said, "Tell them I'm here. Tell my mom I'm here. Please, tell them." I woke up and ran to my parents' bedroom where my mom was awake as well. She too dreamt about the girl. We called the cops and my mother told them about our dream. And even though she begged them to listen to her, they brushed it off as her being crazy. A day or two later, they finally searched Jessica's stepfather's trailer. He had been keeping her there, abusing her until he buried her alive in the backyard. She was the same age as I was. After this, I didn't have many of these dreams, except about little things like my cat getting injured and where to find things I'd lost. But then one night, I had the most terrifying dream that still haunts me. I was about 16 when I had it. I was in a small dimly lit room that looked like an office, and as I looked around, I could see pictures of me on the walls. All pictures seemed to be taken from far away, from the time I was 4 until I was 16. Then I saw a man sitting in a corner of the room, touching one of my pictures of me on the wall. He then looked at me and said, "As soon as you're grown enough, you'll be mine." And then he grabbed me and tried to get me down in the basement, where there was a mattress in the corner. Thankfully, I woke up then. Ever since then, I get anxiety being out in public, feeling like someone is following me. Not to mention, every year I get older, I fear he's going to come after me. Every day of my life, I'm on the lookout for that man. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to all those who sent in their stories.